Well, I just finished J.M. Barrie's original novel, so I've got some new opinions about this movie. Peter Pan. Now, Peter Pan came out in 2003 and is, I guess, an attempt to, as faithfully as possible, adapt the J.M. Barrie story into live action theatrical fare. And this movie does a pretty good job of that. Actually, reading the book, watching the movie, there's a lot that this movie gets right in regards to the book. And on top of that, it is a very entertaining movie. I do enjoy it. Although there are some strange choices that get thrown in there for good measure. But this is not just going to be a review of how faithful this is to the book, because some of the changes that they make to the book do enhance the story a little bit. For instance, Mr. Darling does get a lot more character development in this version than he gets in other versions. Usually we just see him as this big blustery patriarch, but now we see a little bit more color to him. He's this shy, introverted guy, doesn't really know how to do small talk, which that's not really in the book, but based on what we know from the book, we could imply that maybe that is how he's like. We know that he's a very proper British man, that he tries to keep all of his ducks in a row, he likes order. But we also see that he does have kind of a softer side, especially in regards to his wife and their marriage and their relationship. So this interpretation is not out of left field, and seeing that contrasted with his depiction as Hook, which again, same actor as Hook, that's a tradition that goes all the way back to the early days of the play. I think it's really impressive here because you look at Mr. Darling and you look at Captain Hook, and they are completely different characters. Jason Isaacs does a great job at delineating the Mr. Darling personality from the Captain Hook personality, and I think it makes Captain Hook even more threatening and even more of a memorable villain when contrasted with Mr. Darling. However, there is a strange inclusion of this grandmother character early on, and she's the character that really pushes Wendy to grow up, makes her insecure about growing up, that, oh, maybe she's getting too old for the nursery and all this. And what I think they did is they took the maid character, Liza, from the book, who doesn't really serve much of a story, and turned her into this grandmother character who admittedly does contribute. She's the one that makes Wendy all insecure, but I don't think that was necessary either. I think you could have gotten that across just as well with Mr. Darling and Mrs. Darling and their conversations with Wendy. I think, like every other version, that works just as well. But now let's talk about our titular character, Peter Pan himself. Now, the book version of Peter Pan is a really hard thing to adapt because Peter Pan is the boy that never grows up, right? He's this spirit of youth and innocence. He doesn't like thinking about serious things. He just wants to run and play and fly around all day. And he's kind of a jerk. He's actually kind of a dictator with regards to the Lost Boys, and the Lost Boys just kind of hang around him because he's fun to be around when he's in a good mood, but when he's in a bad mood, he's really mean to these Lost Boys. But I think that's J.M. Barrie's point, is that kids are this unruly bunch of emotions that you never know what you're going to get with them at any given moment, and Peter Pan embodies that to a T in the story. Now, in the movie, they kind of soften him a little bit. They don't make him quite the dictator of the Lost Boys that he is in the book, but they still give him that youthful energy and carefree nature that you would expect from Peter Pan. But the other thing that they give him, and this really does bother me about this version, and it pops up in a few versions here and there, is that Peter seems to have very mature feelings, or at least an infatuation with Wendy that goes beyond this childhood longing for a mother. There's clearly a romantic interest there. And looking back to the book, you could say that there is something there, but the way I read it is more like Peter Pan, because he's a boy and he's got this arrested development, he can't understand those emotions, so he can't act upon them, so he shuts them down, and he just wants to be this youthful prepubescent boy that doesn't even want to acknowledge Wendy as any kind of romantic figure. When they start creating these familial roles of Wendy as the mother and Peter as the father, Peter kind of freaks out. He's like, this is just pretend, right? And then Wendy reassures him, yeah, of course. If you want it to be, it'll just be pretend. But if you want it to be more, we can do that also, because Wendy is the one who's maturing. She's growing up. She's coming to grips with puberty and change. And it's the story of Wendy maturing when Peter Pan is just not. And that's the tragedy of Peter Pan. Peter Pan is so stuck in Neverland in his ways that he can't mature. And whenever you're adapting Peter Pan, I think it's a really important aspect of the story to think about and consider with how you depict him. And in this movie, I think they make him a little too eager to be with Wendy. And you could say that, oh, that's just him wanting her to be his mother. But you look at the looks that he gives Wendy in this movie, you look at the softer scenes that they have together, the more romantic scenes, and it definitely feels like a reciprocal romantic relationship. Unlike the book where you have Wendy, Tinkerbell, and Tiger Lily literally throwing themselves at Peter's feet, and Peter just not catching on. He's oblivious to all of that. But that complicated romance aside, all their interactions are very close to the book and they're very well done. I love that we actually got to see them do the kiss exchange, right? The acorn and the thimble. And then when she tries to give him a thimble, that's when Tink freaks out because she's like, I know what game you're playing. Now we come to Neverland. You have Wendy, Michael, and John, and Peter Pan and Tinkerbell all approaching Neverland. And the flight to Neverland is when we first get a glimpse at what kind of special effects we're dealing with in this movie. And these special effects, they're inconsistent to say the least. Some of these special effects look great. Like when we're on the pirate ship, all the pirate stuff looks fantastic. The mermaids look cool and interesting, not quite as they're depicted in the books, but an interesting interpretation nonetheless. And then when they're on Marooner's Rock, that set of this castle that encompasses Marooner's Rock looks really impressive. That's clearly where the money went. Where the money didn't really go is with the green screen and flying effects because these look a bit rough. And it's weird because this is 2003, so the CGI wasn't quite there. It's not quite where it is now. This is only a year after Attack of the Clones, so you can kind of understand why some of the space stuff that they fly past looks kind of, PlayStation 1 ish. But when I was watching it, even when it's not completely CGI backgrounds, when it's just green screen with a different background in place, I kept thinking about Hook, the Spielberg movie with Robin Williams, and I've already reviewed that movie. You can check it out. But that movie had very similar shoddy green screen flying effects, and I just don't know if that's the Peter Pan curse, that Peter Pan movies are doomed to have subpar flying effects, because you even look at the Mary Martin version early on. That was basically just the stage play version. The flying effects in that aren't great either. So I don't know, maybe it's a tradition to have the flying effects look kind of hokey. But that being said, even though they don't look realistic and they look kind of cheap, they do look creative. And the backgrounds that they create, the clouds, the space stuff, the flying over London, it does look cool. It looks interesting. It looks like they did put a lot of thought and creativity into it, even if it doesn't look quite realistic. And I can say the same thing for a lot of the visuals in this movie. This is a very visually interesting movie. The lighting, the different colors on screen, especially when they're in Neverland. Neverland looks pretty awesome. It has a lot of different stuff going on. It's chaotic, as Neverland should be. Everything's just happening in rapid succession. And you get that vibe with the different biomes that we see on Neverland. And stuff like that I don't take issue with because it doesn't contradict anything in the book and it doesn't compromise any of the deeper themes and messages from the book, but does give us a bigger scope and bigger understanding of how Neverland works compared to the book. Because the book also says that they went on a lot of other adventures that just did not fit in the book and couldn't be chronicled because there's just so much going on. So it is cool to visually see some of the other possibilities that Neverland could bring. And when they actually get to Neverland, it does follow the book very closely. Wendy gets shot down, and then they build the house around Wendy, and they start creating their little family unit with Wendy as the mother over the Lost Boys. So that's all great. And all that's handled with a lot of personality, a lot of charm. And honestly, for me, the best part of any Peter Pan adaptation is seeing Peter and the Lost Boys and Wendy being kids, just seeing how kids interact. Now, I don't have any kids of my own, but I am a teacher of sorts, so I do see kids interacting with each other all the time. And I see how feral and unruly they can be if they don't have any kind of order. So seeing the Lost Boys and Peter and Wendy and Michael and John just having free reign of their own life, making up rules to games as they go along and just changing them on a whim. It is a very true to life interpretation of how these kids would act. And I do appreciate that in any version of Peter Pan. The more they can get down just the human nature of children and the fact that they're not all put together. But it's around the Marooner's Rock segment when we start to see even more changes to the source material. And it's not so much about the plot or pacing as it is about John and Tiger Lily's relationship. Because here we have Tiger Lily infatuated with John instead of Peter Pan. And to a degree, I do understand why they made this change. They wanted John to have more of an identity, so they gave him a girlfriend, which that doesn't really give you much more of an identity, John. And honestly, John and Michael are pretty forgettable in this version. They don't have a lot of memorable lines. They don't have a lot of interesting stuff to say, except for the fact that John and Tiger Lily have a fling in this version. But what bothers me more than that is that it doesn't give the opportunity to have the Tiger Lily Peter Pan relationship that happens in the book. Because if this movie does have a fatal flaw, it is kind of the botched relationship between Peter Pan and Wendy in this movie. And I've already kind of talked about this, but the idea that they kind of made Peter Pan monogamous, that he only has eyes for Wendy, and all these other women he doesn't care about. He doesn't care about Tink, but he does care about Wendy, is a mistake. And it's even worse because you don't have that other woman in his life, Tiger Lily, who's literally proposing to Peter Pan in the book, and Peter's just not getting it. That adds a little bit more understanding to where Peter's at developmentally, and that he can't even be that interested in Wendy either, aside from just a devoted son. So yeah, if we're going for book accurate, that was kind of a missed opportunity there too. But the character that almost makes up for all of this is Jason Isaacs' Captain Hook, because I love Captain Hook. Captain Hook has always been my favorite character in any version of Peter Pan. I love him in the Disney version. I love him in Hook. He is such a fascinating character because of his weird relationship with Peter Pan. And in this movie, it's made even more complicated where maybe he has kind of this codependency with Peter Pan that is definitely not in the book. In the book, it's just straight up hatred. He hates his cockiness. He hates that he's the spirit of youth, and he's this older man who's already got one hand in the grave and is being pursued by time as embodied by the crocodile. And I think I love Captain Hook because of all that symbolism that surrounds Captain Hook. He's the embodiment of the tyrannical father that Wendy tried to escape and that Peter Pan desperately does not want to become. And if you want to do a deep dive in the symbolism of Captain Hook, it is an endless trail, and you just keep unraveling even more threads of what Captain Hook means as an antagonist to Wendy, to the Darling Kids, to Peter Pan. And Jason Isaacs plays this incredibly well. He gives it some weight, some gravitas, some nuance. When he has scenes with Wendy, he plays it more as this father figure that wants her to join his team. And then when he has scenes with Peter Pan, he is the embodiment of everything Peter does not want to become, and it just works great. And his delivery is hilarious when he's confused or when he's terrified by the crocodile. His reactions, everything is just on point. And I love the fact that we actually see his stump and we see the apparatus that allows him to have the hook on his hand. All of that's great. And whenever Hook and the crocodile are on screen, the movie just goes up for me. I'm having so much fun. And now we come to the part of the movie that's probably the hardest to adapt in any Peter Pan adaptation, and it's the I Do Believe in Fairies section of the story. And in a play, this works probably the best it ever can work. Tink drinks the poison that Hook tried to trap Peter Pan with, and now she's dying. And Peter now needs everybody to say, I do believe in fairies, and clap your hands, and maybe Tink will come back alive. And in a play, in an auditorium, this works because you actually have audience participation. You have them actually responding, kind of a fourth wall breaking moment. And in a play, that works. Now, in a movie, you don't really have that audience participation unless you're Dora the Explorer, and that can come off as really cringy. In the Disney version, they just cut this completely until the sequel, and I actually think the sequel did it pretty well because Jane didn't believe in fairies, and then she converted and she said that she did believe, and it was just her transformation that brought Tink to life. But again, that doesn't really fit here. It's kind of a different circumstance. So I was really curious in the book how they handle this, because in a book you don't have the fourth wall break opportunity because it's a book, you're reading it. So in the book they explain it as, well, Neverland is the land of dreams, so all the kids around the world that are asleep in their beds all of a sudden start dreaming about I do believe in fairies. They start saying it and they start clapping their hands in their sleep, and then that's how Tink comes back alive. And that's admittedly a little implausible, but since Neverland is the land of dreams and the collective dreams of all the children in the world make Neverland what it is, I can buy that. Now in this movie, they do something almost like that, but not quite. It's a little weird, and I feel like if they had done it like they did it in the book, it would have worked okay. If you just cut to all these children in their beds in London and around the world dreaming, and they're saying, I do believe in fairies, and they maybe clap their hands a little bit, but you see the montage of all of them and just the sheer numbers of them bring Tink back alive. Now we're cooking. I think nobody would really have issue with that. But the way they do it here, you have some of that. You have some kids asleep in their beds that are dreaming and they say, I do believe in fairies. But then you have grown adults that are wide awake, like Mr. Darling, all of a sudden just breaking out into I do believe in fairies. And on top of that, you have the Lost Boys and Wendy and Michael and John on the pirate ship captured, also just randomly breaking out into I do believe in fairies. And it just doesn't make sense. Even in the world that they've created, it doesn't really make sense. So it's a little distracting. And after that, the movie plays out pretty much exactly as the book does, with, a few changes here and there to add some more theatrical spice. Peter and Tinkerbell crash the pirate ship, rescue the Lost Boys, rescue Wendy. They kill off all the pirates. Hook gets eaten by the crocodile. The day is saved. Everyone's happy. They go back to London. Wendy, Michael, John are home, and then all the Lost Boys get adopted, and they lived happily ever after the end. Except for Peter Pan, who is the boy that never grew up. So yeah, that's the 2003 adaptation of Peter Pan. And as far as adaptations go, this may be the most book accurate theatrically released Peter Pan movie that we have. I know a lot of people feel like the Disney version is the definitive one, and it is a good version. The Disney version does get a lot right, although it doesn't go as deep into some of the deeper ideas and themes that are in the book. This one does, and there's a lot of very deep ideas and deep concepts in this movie that adults and kids can both gravitate to. And this is just a good movie. My only real problem with it is some of the stranger choices that they make regarding the source material. A lot of the changes I can roll with, but what they did to the character of Peter Pan, the fact that they made him more interested in Wendy in a romantic sense, and that relationship is more or less reciprocal, is just not all that present in the book. And I wish they had given Peter more of the hang-ups character-wise that he had in the book, to just make him more of an interesting character, to make him a good foil for Wendy, because Wendy and Peter in the book do not just get along the whole time. They bicker, they argue, and they have a very tense relationship, which is why Wendy ends up leaving him in the end. And for me, I just wish that that was more present in this movie, because it takes such pains to paint a very book accurate Neverland, a very book accurate narrative. But now I turn over to you guys. What do you think about the 2003 version of Peter Pan? Whatever you think, let me know in the comments. And if you like this video, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more content, and hit the notification bell to be notified every time I upload a video. And as always, I'm Colby. This is my Nerdy Talk, and I'll see you in the next video.